Liam, a struggling single father scraping by on pennies, opened his door on a rain-lashed night to two silent, doll-like twin girls, never knowing that this simple act of kindness was a ripple that would reach the shores of a lonely millionaire's hardened heart, and in doing so, would change the course of 4 lives forever. The wind howled a mournful song against the thin glass of his small apartment window, a chorus to the symphony of his anxieties. Inside, the world had shrunk to the size of a single overdue electricity bill lying accusingly on his small kitchen table. He was a man defined by what he lacked. Yet in that singular moment, faced with the drenched and shivering forms of 2 children, he would act from a place of profound, instinctual wealth. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you. The rain fell in relentless, sweeping curtains, blurring the edges of the city into a watercolor of gray and despair. For Liam, the sound was a constant, drumming reminder of the leaks in his roof and the deeper, more pervasive leaks in his finances. He sat with his 6-year-old son, Leo, a small, bright sun in his otherwise overcast world, reading a worn-out picture book under the flickering light of a single lamp. They were sharing the last of the bread and a thin, watery soup for dinner, a meal made substantial only by the love with which it was served. Liam's own stomach growled in protest, a familiar ache he had long learned to ignore for the sake of his son. It was in this quiet bubble of hardship and affection that the knock came, a sound so timid it was almost swallowed by the storm. Liam paused, his heart skipping a beat. Unwelcome visitors at this hour usually meant the landlord or another bill collector, a harbinger of more trouble. He glanced at Leo, whose wide, trusting eyes were fixed on the door. Forcing a reassuring smile, Liam rose, the floorboards creaking under the weight of his exhaustion. He opened the door a crack, peering into the dark, wet hallway, expecting the worst. But it was not the worst, it was something far stranger. 2 young girls, no older than Leo, stood on his doormat, perfect mirror images of one another. They wore identical, expensive-looking coats, now soaked and dripping onto the worn linoleum, and their small, polished shoes were stained with mud. Their faces were pale and porcelain, their large, dark eyes holding a depth of sorrow that seemed too vast for their small frames. They did not speak. They simply stood there, trembling, 2 lost dolls left out in the storm, their silence a question far more profound than any words could convey. It was a test of his character, though he did not know it, a moment that would cleave his life into a before and an after. Liam's first instinct was pure, unadulterated shock. He stared at the twin girls, his mind struggling to process the surreal image before him. They were like figures from a fairy tale, dropped onto the grim, realistic canvas of his life. He looked past them, down the dimly lit, empty hallway and then out into the raging storm, searching for a parent, a guardian, anyone who could explain their presence. There was no one. The wind and rain were the only answer, whipping a cold spray into his small apartment. His gaze returned to the children. Their stillness was unnerving, their silence heavy with unspoken stories. One of the girls clutched the hand of her sister, her knuckles white. The other held a small, beautifully crafted leather satchel, a stark contrast to the poverty of the surroundings. "Are you lost?" Liam asked, his voice softer than he intended, barely a whisper above the storm. The girls simply stared at him, their expressions unreadable. He saw a flicker of fear in their eyes, but also a strange, quiet dignity. He knew he should be cautious. In this part of the city, trouble often wore innocent faces. But as he looked at their shivering bodies and the way their small chests rose and fell with shallow, cold breaths, the cynical part of him dissolved. He saw only children, vulnerable and in need. He thought of Leo, warm and safe inside, and the thought of closing the door on these 2 was a physical impossibility. "Come in," he said, opening the door wider. "Come in out of the rain." He ushered them inside, the cold, damp air clinging to them and filling the small space. Leo, who had been watching from the couch, scrambled over, his curiosity overpowering his shyness. Liam closed the door, shutting out the storm and, in doing so, letting in a destiny he could never have imagined. He took their wet coats, the fabric impossibly soft and heavy in his hands, and hung them on the hooks by the door, where they dripped onto a towel he placed beneath them. He was acutely aware of the shabbiness of his home in their presence, the threadbare rug, the peeling paint, the mismatched furniture sourced from thrift stores and curbsides. He felt a pang of shame, but pushed it aside. Their need was greater than his pride. He guided them toward the small worn sofa where Leo was now sitting, watching them with wide, inquisitive eyes. The girls, whose names he would later learn were Ilara and Lyra, moved with a strange, synchronized grace, sitting primly on the edge of the sofa cushions. They did not speak to each other or to him, their eyes taking in the small apartment with a quiet, unnerving intensity. Liam's home was meager, but it was meticulously clean, a testament to his effort to carve out a pocket of dignity amidst his poverty. He knelt before them, trying to bring himself to their level. "My name is Liam," he said gently. "And this is my son, Leo." Leo offered a small wave, clutching his stuffed bear, a threadbare companion named Barnaby. "What are your names?" The girl on the left, the one who had been holding the satchel, finally spoke. Her voice, a clear, soft chime. "Ilara." The other simply nodded, her gaze fixed on a small crack in the plaster wall. "And I'm Lyra," Ilara added, as if speaking for them both. "Are your parents nearby? Do you know their phone number?" Liam asked, his mind racing through the practicalities. He had to find their family. Ilara shook her head. A single, decisive movement. "We were with someone, but we got separated in the rain." The explanation felt thin, incomplete. But Liam didn't press. He could see the exhaustion etched onto their faces, the purple shadows beneath their eyes. The immediate need was warmth and comfort. "Well, you're safe here for now," he reassured them. "You must be hungry." He thought of the half-eaten loaf of bread and the last dregs of soup in the pot. It was hardly a feast, but it was all he had. Without another word, he went to the small kitchenette and ladled the remaining soup into 2 of his 3 bowls. He sliced the bread, giving them the thickest, softest pieces, and leaving the heel for himself for the next day's breakfast. He placed the meager meal on small trays and brought it to them. The girls looked at the simple fare, then at him, a flicker of something unreadable in their eyes. For a moment, he worried they might refuse it, that it was too humble for children accustomed to more. But then, Ilara picked up her spoon, and Lyra followed suit. They ate slowly, deliberately, their perfect table manners out of place in the humble setting. Yet their hunger was undeniable. As the girls ate, a fragile sense of normalcy settled over the small room. Leo, emboldened by their quiet presence, slid off the couch and approached them, holding out Barnaby the bear. "He gives good hugs," Leo announced with the simple sincerity of a child. Lyra, the more silent of the two, looked at the proffered toy, her expression softening for the first time. She reached out a small, hesitant hand and gently stroked the bear's fuzzy ear. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Liam watched the interaction, a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the small heater humming in the corner. He saw the flicker of childhood innocence breaking through their guarded exteriors, and it solidified his resolve. These were not just strangers. They were children who needed his protection. After they finished their meal, he cleared the bowls, his mind already working on the next problem, sleeping arrangements. His apartment consisted of 1 small bedroom and the main living area. He and Leo shared the bedroom, which contained a single mattress on the floor and a small cot. There was no guest room, no spare bed. There was only the lumpy, sagging sofa. He couldn't in good conscience let them sleep on that. He made a decision. He went into the bedroom and returned with his own pillow and a thick, patched quilt his grandmother had made years ago. He arranged them on the sofa, doing his best to make it look inviting. "This isn't much," he said apologetically, "but it's warm." Ilara looked at the sofa, then at the bedroom door, her perception seemingly extending beyond the physical space. "Where will you sleep?" she asked, her directness catching him off guard. "Oh, we'll be fine," Liam said, waving a dismissive hand. "Leo and I will have a camp, out on the floor. It's an adventure." It was a lie, of course. Sleeping on the hard floor would be a misery for his aching back. but it was a necessary one. Leo, overhearing the word camp out, clapped his hands in delight, oblivious to the sacrifice it represented. Liam's heart ached with a mixture of love for his son's innocence and the deep, abiding weariness of his own life. Yet, as he looked at the two girls, their bellies full, their bodies finally warm, he felt a sense of purpose that transcended his own discomfort. The storm continued its assault on the city, but inside Liam's small apartment, a quiet sanctuary had been formed. He gave the girls 2 of his own t-shirts to sleep in, which were far too large for them but were at least dry and clean. As they changed in the small bathroom, he and Leo laid out blankets on the living room floor, creating their makeshift campsite. When Ilara and Lyra emerged, swallowed in the soft cotton of his shirts, they looked even smaller, more vulnerable. Liam tried to maintain a cheerful demeanor for Leo's sake, but a heavy sense of responsibility settled upon him. He was now the temporary guardian of 3 children, with barely enough resources to care for one. He tucked the girls into the sofa bed, pulling the heavy quilt up to their chins. "Try to get some sleep," he said softly. Lyra was already closing her eyes, her exhaustion finally winning, but Ilara's gaze remained fixed on him. "Thank you," she whispered, the words carrying a weight that felt far beyond her years. "You're welcome," Liam replied, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. He turned off the main lamp, leaving only a small nightlight glowing in the corner, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. He and Leo settled onto their pallet on the floor. Leo snuggled close, his small body a familiar comfort. "Daddy," Leo whispered into the darkness. "Are they angels?" Liam smiled, stroking his son's hair. "No, buddy. They're just little girls who needed a safe place to stay." But as he lay there, listening to the steady rhythm of 3 children breathing in the quiet dark, he wasn't so sure. Their sudden appearance felt like a strange sort of miracle, a disruption to the monotonous hardship of his life. He didn't know what the morning would bring: the difficult questions, the search for their family, the inevitable return to his own struggles. But for tonight, in the small, warm space he had created, 4 people were safe from the storm, and that felt like a kind of grace. He closed his eyes, the hard floor unforgiving beneath him, and drifted into an uneasy sleep, unaware that in a sterile, opulent mansion across the city, a man was staring into the same storm with a heart as cold and empty as the rain-swept night. Alistair Finch stood before a floor-to-ceiling window, the city lights a distant, glittering carpet below his penthouse apartment. He held a glass of expensive whiskey, the amber liquid untouched, its warmth no match for the chill that had settled deep within his bones. The storm outside was a perfect reflection of the tempest in his soul. He was a man who had everything: wealth that could reshape skylines, power that could make kings tremble, and yet he was utterly bankrupt in the only currency that mattered. His daughters, Ilara and Lyra, were missing. It wasn't a kidnapping for ransom. It was something far more painful, a quiet rebellion, an escape. He had orchestrated a life of perfect safety and privilege for them, a gilded cage designed to protect them from the world that had stolen their mother from him. He had built walls of security guards, private tutors, and carefully vetted staff, but he had forgotten to build a home. He had given them everything except himself. Earlier that day, during a rare and furious argument with their new, overly strict nanny, the girls had simply vanished from the estate grounds. They had slipped through a gap in the fortress he had built, a gap he hadn't anticipated because it was one of trust. His security team was in a frenzy. The police were discreetly alerted, but Alistair knew this was not a matter for authorities. This was a message, a cry for help he had been deaf to for too long. His grief over his wife's death 3 years prior had become a cold, hard shell. He had managed his sorrow the way he managed his business portfolio, with ruthless efficiency and emotional detachment. He had convinced himself that providing for his daughters was the same as loving them. Now, the hollowness of that lie echoed in the silent, empty rooms of his mansion. He had failed them. The thought was a shard of ice in his chest. Where were they? Were they cold? Scared? He tortured himself with images of them alone in the vast, indifferent city, a city that he owned but that could so easily swallow them whole. He had spent his life believing that money was a shield, that it could protect those he loved from harm. Tonight, he was learning the brutal lesson that some storms cannot be weathered with wealth. and that the most valuable things are terrifyingly fragile and cannot be bought. The first pale light of dawn filtered through the grimy window, painting the small apartment in shades of soft gray. Liam awoke with a groan, every muscle in his back and neck protesting its night on the hard floor. For a disorienting moment, he forgot the events of the previous evening, and then memory rushed back in. He sat up carefully, so as not to wake Leo, and looked over at the sofa. The two girls were still asleep, huddled together under the quilt, their faces peaceful in the dim light. The sight sent a strange pang through him, a mixture of tenderness and acute anxiety. What was he going to do? He couldn't keep them. He had to go to work, a low-paying job at a warehouse that he couldn't afford to lose. Leaving them here alone was out of the question, and taking them with him was impossible. The only logical step was to take them to the police station. The thought filled him with a surprising reluctance. In less than 12 hours, a strange protective bond had formed. He felt a responsibility for them that went beyond civic duty. Handing them over to the impersonal bureaucracy of the state felt like a betrayal of the trust they had placed in him by showing up at his door. He tiptoed to the kitchen, his mind a tangled knot of worry. He put on a small pot of coffee, a luxury he usually saved for the weekends, needing the jolt of caffeine to face the day. As the coffee brewed, its rich aroma filling the tiny space, he heard a small stirring from the living room. Ilara was awake, sitting up on the sofa and watching him with those same unsettlingly perceptive eyes. "Good morning," he whispered, offering a smile. "Did you sleep okay?" She nodded, her dark hair a tangled halo around her head. "I did. Thank you. Is that coffee?" "It is," he replied, surprised by her adult-like inquiry. "Would you like some?" He immediately felt foolish for offering coffee to a child. But Ilara simply said, "No thank you, I'm not allowed." The simple statement hinted at a life of rules and structure, a world away from Leo's boisterous, often chaotic upbringing. Lyra began to stir beside her, and soon Leo was awake too, blinking the sleep from his eyes and immediately remembering their guests with a delighted grin. The small apartment was suddenly full of a quiet, morning energy. Liam made breakfast, a small stack of pancakes from a box of mix he'd been saving. It was a meager offering, but he divided it equally among the 3 children, giving each of them a small dollop of syrup. He watched as they ate, a strange, temporary family gathered around his rickety kitchen table. Leo chattered away, telling the girls about his favorite cartoons and his dream of getting a puppy, his innocence a bright counterpoint to the twins' reserved demeanor. Ilara listened politely, occasionally asking a thoughtful question, while Lyra remained mostly silent, her eyes darting between Liam and her sister, as if seeking cues on how to behave. After the plates were cleared, Liam knew he couldn't postpone the inevitable any longer. He knelt down in front of the girls, his expression serious but kind. "Ilara, Lyra," he began, his voice gentle, "I need to find your parents. I have to go to work soon, and I can't leave you here. I think we need to go to the police station. They have ways of finding people." At the mention of the police, a flicker of genuine fear crossed Lyra's face. She instinctively reached for her sister's hand. Ilara's expression remained calm, but her jaw tightened. "We don't want to go there," she said, her voice firm. "They won't understand." "What won't they understand?" Liam pressed, his concern deepening. There was more to this story than 2 lost children. "Our father," Ilara said, her gaze unwavering. "He's very private. He wouldn't want this to be public." The careful choice of words, the air of adult discretion, was deeply unsettling. Who was their father? What was this situation they had run from? Every instinct told him this was more complicated than he could handle, and yet, looking into their pleading eyes, he felt his resolve waver. He was just a man who sorted boxes in a warehouse. He was not equipped for this kind of drama, but the fear in their eyes was real, and the thought of causing them more distress was unbearable. He was torn between the responsible, logical course of action and the compassionate, human one. Just as he was about to insist on the police, a sound from outside interrupted them. It was the low, purring rumble of an expensive car engine, a sound utterly alien to this neighborhood of sputtering, decades-old vehicles. The sound grew closer, then stopped directly in front of his apartment building. Liam's heart pounded in his chest. He moved to the window, cautiously pulling back the edge of the thin curtain. Parked at the curb below was a sleek, black sedan, the kind he had only ever seen in movies. It was so out of place on his cracked, litter-strewn street that it looked like a spaceship had landed. A man in a dark, impeccably tailored suit emerged from the driver's side, his movements crisp and efficient. He opened the rear door, and another man stepped out. Even from 2 stories up, this man radiated an aura of immense wealth and power. He was tall, with a severe, handsome face that was etched with worry and exhaustion. He looked up, his gaze sweeping across the tenement building's facade, as if he could pinpoint the exact location of what he was searching for. Liam's blood ran cold. He turned from the window and looked at the twin girls. Their faces were pale, their breakfast forgotten. "Is that?" he started to ask. But he already knew the answer. Ilara nodded slowly. "That's our father." The quiet finality in her voice sent a shiver down Liam's spine. The mystery of the girl's origins was about to be solved, but a new, more intimidating mystery was just beginning. The powerful man from the car was now walking towards the entrance of his building. A moment later, the sharp, authoritative rap on his apartment door echoed through the small room, a sound that signaled the collision of 2 vastly different worlds. Liam stood frozen for a second, his mind reeling. He looked from the terrified faces of the girls to his own son, who was watching the scene with a child's bewildered curiosity. He took a deep breath, straightened his worn shirt, and walked to the door. He was about to open it to a man whose shoes probably cost more than his monthly rent. He felt small, insignificant, and fiercely protective all at once. He turned the knob and pulled the door inward, coming face to face with the unfulfilled affluent, Mr. Alistair Finch. The man in the doorway was even more imposing up close. His suit was made of a material so fine it seemed to absorb the dim light of the hallway, and his shoes were polished to a mirror shine. But it was his eyes that held Liam's attention. They were gray and stormy, like the sky the night before, and they were filled with a desperate, frantic energy that momentarily stripped away the veneer of wealth and power, revealing the raw fear of a parent. Alistair Finch's gaze swept past Liam, into the apartment, and landed on his daughters. A wave of palpable relief washed over his features, so profound it was almost a physical blow. "Ilara." "Lyra," he breathed, his voice rough with emotion. The girls did not run to him. They remained seated at the table, their small shoulders tense. Alistair took a step inside, his presence seeming to shrink the already cramped room. He barely glanced at the humble surroundings, his entire focus consumed by his children. He crouched down before them, his expensive suit creasing. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice softer now, laced with a pain that was startlingly raw. Ilara nodded, while Lyra simply stared at her hands, which were clasped tightly in her lap. Alistair reached out as if to touch them, but then hesitated, letting his hand fall back to his side. The small, aborted gesture spoke volumes about the distance between them. Only then did he seem to fully register Liam's presence. He straightened up to his full height and turned, his expression shifting from paternal fear to a cool, appraising assessment. He looked Liam up and down, taking in his frayed jeans and faded t-shirt, his calloused hands, and the unmistakable weariness in his eyes. Liam felt like a specimen under a microscope. "I am Alistair Finch," the man said, his voice a low, commanding baritone. It was a statement, not an introduction. "I assume you are the one who found them." "My name is Liam," he replied, his own voice sounding thin and inadequate in comparison. "They were out in the storm. I brought them in." Alistair's eyes narrowed slightly, searching for something opportunism, perhaps a hint of a threat, but he found none. He saw the half-eaten pancakes on the table, the makeshift bed on the sofa, his daughters wearing another man's oversized t-shirts. The evidence of simple, uncalculated kindness was undeniable. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a thick, leather wallet. Liam's stomach clenched. He knew what was coming. It was the transaction, the moment his act of decency would be assigned a monetary value. Alistair Finch extracted a thick wad of cash from his wallet. a sum that was likely more than Liam earned in 6 months. The crisp edges of the bills seemed to mock the poverty of the room. "I am in your debt," Alistair said, his tone formal, transactional. "Please, take this for your trouble." He held out the money, an offering that was both a reward and a dismissal. It was a gesture designed to settle an account, to neatly conclude this messy, inconvenient intersection of their lives. For a fleeting moment, Liam was tempted. That money could fix everything. It could pay his rent for the rest of the year, buy Leo new clothes, fill their refrigerator with food, and erase the suffocating weight of his debt. It was an easy way out, a lifeline he desperately needed. But then he looked at the money, and he looked at the 2 girls who were watching him with an unnerving intensity, and he felt a profound sense of revulsion. To accept the cash would be to cheapen what he had done. It would turn a simple act of human decency into a service rendered. It would validate the cynical worldview that Alistair Finch seemed to inhabit. A world where everything and everyone had a price. He thought about the warmth he felt watching Leo offer his bear to a stranger, about the quiet satisfaction of knowing the girls were safe and warm while the storm raged. Those feelings were not for sale. With a resolve that surprised even himself, Liam shook his head and pushed the offered hand away gently. "No, thank you," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Alistair froze, his hand suspended in mid-air, his expression one of utter disbelief. It was clear that he was a man who was not accustomed to having his money refused. "I beg your pardon?" he asked, a sharp edge of suspicion creeping into his voice. "I don't want your money," Liam repeated. Meeting the millionaire's gaze directly, he saw the flicker of confusion, the mind accustomed to power and influence, struggling to compute this unexpected variable. They were children. They were cold and scared. It's what anyone would have done. That simple sentence, spoken with such plain, unadorned sincerity, struck Alistair Finch with the force of a physical blow. He had lived for years in a world where kindness was always a currency, a means to an end. Every favor came with an invoice. Every act of charity was a calculated investment in public image. He had forgotten, or perhaps had never known, that kindness could exist in its purest form, as an instinct, not a strategy. He stared at Liam, truly seeing him for the first time, not as a representative of the lower class, but as an individual whose integrity was a fortress. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken meaning. Alistair slowly, almost reluctantly, withdrew his hand and returned the money to his wallet. The power dynamic in the room had subtly, yet seismically, shifted. The millionaire, for the first time in a long time, was at a loss. He looked at his daughters, who were now looking at Liam with a new expression, a mixture of awe and admiration. He realized that in his desperate attempt to shield them with wealth, this poor man, with nothing to his name, had given them a lesson in character that no amount of money could ever buy. Alistair's hard, cynical exterior began to crack. He saw the worn-out furniture, the meager breakfast, the patched quilt on the sofa. He saw the sacrifice Liam had made without a second thought. A sacrifice he now understood was not offered in expectation of a reward. A wave of shame washed over him. He had come here prepared to deal with a potential opportunist, a squatter on the moral high ground looking for a payout. Instead, he had found a man of quiet, unshakable dignity. I don't know what to say," Alistair admitted, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. He was a man of action, of directives and solutions. He was not a man who was ever at a loss for words. "There's nothing to say," Liam said simply, his tone devoid of judgment. He just wanted this strange, intense interlude to be over so he could go back to his simple, complicated life. "You should get your daughters home. They were worried about you." Alistair nodded, still processing the encounter. He motioned for the girls to come, and this time, they went to him, a new, tentative trust in their eyes. He placed his hands on their shoulders, a gesture that was both protective and grounding. He turned back to Liam one last time. He pulled a slim, elegant business card from his wallet. It was made of thick, expensive cardstock, his name embossed in gold foil. "If you ever need anything," Alistair said, his voice imbued with a newfound sincerity. "Anything at all. Please, call me, I insist." This time, the offer felt different. It was not a payment. It was the tentative extension of a bridge between two worlds. Liam hesitated for a moment, then took the card. He had no intention of ever using it, but refusing it felt like a rebuff to the genuine shift he had witnessed in the man. He tucked it into the pocket of his jeans, the sharp, stiff corner, a strange contrast against his worn denim. Alistair Finch guided his daughters out of the apartment. And a moment later, Liam heard the whisper of the expensive car pulling away from the curb, its sound fading into the normal morning traffic, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before. Life, for a time, returned to its familiar, grinding rhythm. Liam went back to his job at the warehouse, the memory of the strange encounter with the millionaire and his twin daughters feeling more like a vivid dream with each passing day. He would occasionally find the expensive business card while doing laundry, a stark, glossy reminder of a world so vastly different from his own. He always put it back in his drawer, a souvenir from another life that had briefly, inexplicably, touched his. He fell back into the routine of stretching every dollar, of choosing between paying a bill and buying a slightly better cut of meat for Leo's dinner, of fighting the constant, creeping tide of exhaustion. The brief, dramatic interlude had changed nothing, and yet it had changed everything. He found himself thinking about the quiet dignity of the girls, the hollow sadness in the rich man's eyes. The encounter had planted a seed of perspective in his mind. His life was hard, yes, but it was not empty. He had Leo. He had a home, however humble. He had his integrity. He realized, with a clarity that was both comforting and sobering, that there were different kinds of poverty, and his was only the financial kind. He focused on the small joys, Leo's laughter as they kicked a soccer ball in the park, the quiet moments reading together before bed, the simple, profound love that filled their small apartment. Weeks turned into a month, then two. The city grew colder as winter began to set in, its icy breath seeping through the cracks in Liam's window frames. And with the cold came sickness. It started as a small cough, a sniffle that Liam initially dismissed as a common cold. But Leo's cough deepened, turning into a harsh, barking sound that echoed in the small apartment at night. His small body was racked with fever, his usual boundless energy replaced by a listless lethargy. Liam's anxiety grew with each passing day. He took time off from work, his meager savings dwindling with every missed shift. He took Leo to the local clinic, where a harried doctor diagnosed it as a severe respiratory infection, prescribing antibiotics and rest. But the medication didn't work. Leo only got worse. His breathing became labored, each inhale a painful, wheezing struggle. The nights were the worst. Liam would sit by Leo's side, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead, listening to the terrifying sound of his son fighting for every breath. The fear was a cold, physical thing, a knot of ice in his stomach that never went away. The breaking point came on a frigid Tuesday night. Leo's fever spiked dangerously high, and he was struggling to breathe. His small lips tinged with a terrifying shade of blue. Panic, sharp and blinding, seized Liam. He wrapped Leo in a blanket and rushed him to the emergency room. The hospital was a world of sterile white walls, antiseptic smells, and a chilling, bureaucratic indifference. After hours of waiting, a doctor with tired, compassionate eyes delivered the devastating news. Leo had a rare and aggressive form of pneumonia. He needed to be admitted immediately. He needed a specialist. He needed a battery of tests and a cocktail of powerful, expensive medications. The doctor spoke of treatments and procedures, but all Liam heard was the unspoken price tag. A sum so astronomical, it might as well have been $1 billion. His insurance, a basic plan with a high deductible, would cover only a fraction of the cost. He felt the floor drop out from beneath him. He was trapped in a nightmare where his son's life depended on a sum of money he could never hope to possess. He sat by Leo's hospital bed, watching his son sleep fitfully, a tangle of tubes and wires connecting him to beeping machines. He felt a helplessness so profound, it was suffocating. He had never felt so utterly, devastatingly poor. He was failing his son in the most fundamental way a parent could. He would have sold his soul, done anything to make it right, but the world demanded cash, and he had none. For 2 days, he lived in a fog of fear and despair, sleeping in a hard plastic chair by Leo's bedside, surviving on vending machine coffee. The hospital's billing administrator, a woman with a kind but firm demeanor, explained the financial realities. He needed to make a substantial down payment for the specialized treatment to continue. It was a sum he couldn't even fathom. He called his boss, begging for an advance, but was met with a sympathetic but firm refusal. He had no family to turn to, no one. He was at the end of his rope, staring into an abyss of despair. And then, as he sat there, his head in his hands, a distant memory flickered in his mind. A sleek, black car. A man with stormy gray eyes, a stiff, elegant business card. He remembered the words, "If you ever need anything, anything at all, please call me." He had sworn to himself he would never use it. It felt like charity, a surrender of his pride. But as he looked at his son, fighting for his life in a hospital bed, he knew that his pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. His son's life was worth more than his dignity. With trembling hands, he pulled out his wallet and found the card, tucked away behind his driver's license. The gold-embossed letters seemed to mock him. Alistair Finch. He stared at the phone number, his heart hammering against his ribs. Making this call felt like the ultimate defeat, an admission that he couldn't do it on his own. But it was his only hope. He took a deep, shaky breath, walked out into the sterile hallway, and dialed the number. The phone was answered on the second ring, not by a secretary or an automated system, but by the man himself. "Finch?" The voice was crisp, efficient. "This is Liam," he stammered, his own name feeling foreign and small. "We met a couple of months ago. My son and I. You came to my apartment, your daughters." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and for a terrifying moment, Liam thought the man wouldn't remember, that he had been just a fleeting, forgettable blip in the millionaire's life. But then the voice returned, softer, tinged with recognition. "I remember you, Liam. Is everything all right?" The simple question, spoken with genuine concern, was almost his undoing. The dam of his carefully controlled emotions threatened to break. He swallowed hard, forcing the words out, his voice cracking with the strain. "No, nothing is all right. My son, Leo, he's sick. He's in the hospital. He needs a specialist, and I can't afford it." He hated the words, hated the desperation he heard in his own voice. He finished speaking and waited, bracing himself for a polite refusal, a referral to a charitable foundation, anything but direct help. But Alistair Finch's response was immediate and decisive. "Which hospital?" Liam told him. "Stay there. Don't talk to anyone about payment. Don't sign anything. I'm on my way." The line went dead. Liam stood in the hallway, the phone still pressed to his ear, his body trembling with a mixture of shock, relief, and profound shame. He had done it. He had asked for help. He had surrendered. He went back into Leo's room and sat down, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. He didn't know what to expect. Would the man send a check? Would a lawyer arrive to handle the details? He couldn't imagine Alistair Finch himself, a titan of industry, setting foot in this public, overburdened hospital. But less than an hour later, Alistair Finch walked into Leo's hospital room. He was not flanked by assistants or security. He was alone. He had changed out of his suit and was wearing simple dark trousers and a cashmere sweater. Yet he still carried an undeniable aura of command. But the look on his face was not one of pity or condescension. It was one of deep, human concern. He walked over to the bed and looked down at Leo, his expression softening as he took in the small, frail form connected to the machines. "He's a fighter," Alistair said quietly, his gaze meeting Liam's. And in that moment, they were not a rich man and a poor man. They were just two fathers, connected by the universal, terrifying vulnerability of loving a child. Alistair didn't just send money. He brought his entire world to bear on the problem. He made a single phone call, and within minutes, the hospital's chief administrator was in the room. His demeanor suddenly transformed from bureaucratic to deferential. The best pediatric pulmonologist in the state, a man whose waiting list was years long, was being flown in by helicopter. Leo was being moved to a private suite on the top floor, a place of quiet comfort and state-of-the-art technology. Liam watched it all unfold with a sense of dazed disbelief. It was like watching a force of nature at work, the power of immense wealth bending reality to its will. But it was what happened next that truly stunned him. Alistair didn't leave after making the arrangements. He stayed. He sat with Liam in the new, comfortable waiting room of the private suite. He had coffee brought for them both, and then he did something Liam never expected. He talked. He didn't talk about business or money. He talked about his wife, about the brutal, unfair cancer that had stolen her from him and his daughters. He spoke of his grief, a raw, gaping wound that he had tried to cauterize with work and isolation. He confessed that his daughters running away had been a desperate wake-up call. "I was so terrified of losing them," Alistair said, his voice low, his gaze fixed on some distant point of memory, "that I held them too tight. I thought providing for them was the same as being present for them. I built them a fortress, but I forgot to make it a home. They weren't running from me, Liam. They were running towards a feeling. The feeling of a home. The kind of feeling they must have gotten, however briefly, in your apartment." The confession hung in the air between them. A moment of profound, startling honesty. Alistair looked at Liam, his eyes filled with a weary, hard-won clarity. "When you refused my money," he continued, "you reminded me of a truth I had long forgotten. That some things, the most important things, have no price. Integrity, dignity, kindness. You have them in abundance. I, on the other hand, was the truly poor one in that room." The roles had been completely reversed. The millionaire was seeking something from the pauper, not money or influence, but something far more valuable, a lesson in humanity. Leo's recovery was slow but steady. Under the care of the world-class specialist, he began to turn a corner. The powerful medication started to work, the fever broke, and the labored wheezing in his chest eased into quiet, even breaths. During those long days and nights at the hospital, an unlikely friendship formed between Liam and Alistair. The vast chasm of their financial differences was bridged by a shared, fundamental humanity. Alistair was there not as a benefactor, but as a friend. He brought books for Liam to read, shared meals with him in the hospital cafeteria, and listened, truly listened, as Liam talked about his own life, his dreams for Leo, and the quiet, daily struggles of making ends meet. In turn, Liam listened as Alistair spoke of the crushing loneliness of wealth, the constant suspicion that every relationship was transactional, and his deep-seated fear of failing as a father. Alara and Lyra came to visit, their initial shyness around Liam replaced by a quiet, genuine affection. They would sit with Leo, reading him stories or playing quiet games, their presence a soothing balm. Liam saw a change in them too. They smiled more freely, and the haunted, guarded look in their eyes had begun to fade. They were healing, just like Leo was. On the day Leo was finally discharged from the hospital, healthy and pink-cheeked, Alistair was there. He settled the final bill without a word. A transaction that happened discreetly in the background. A mere footnote to the real story. As they stood outside in the bright, cold sunshine, Liam struggled to find the words to express the depth of his gratitude. "Alistair won. I can never repay you," he began, his voice thick with emotion. Alistair placed a hand on his shoulder, his expression serious. "You already have, Liam. You gave me back my daughters, not by finding them, but by showing them what genuine kindness looks like. You showed me what it looks like. That is a debt I can never fully repay." But Alistair was determined to try. A week later, he approached Liam not with an offer of charity, but with a proposition. He was starting a new charitable foundation, one aimed at providing resources and support for struggling single-parent families. It would be a foundation built on the principle of offering a hand up, not a handout. He didn't want a boardroom of financiers running it. He wanted it to have a heart. He wanted Liam to run it. "I need someone with integrity," Alistair had said. "Someone who understands the struggle, who knows that dignity is just as important as assistance. I need someone like you." Liam was speechless. It was a chance to not only escape his own poverty, but to spend his life helping others do the same. It was a purpose, a calling he had never dared to dream of. He accepted. Months later, the world was transformed. Liam and Leo lived in a comfortable, modest house in a good neighborhood, a home filled with light, warmth, and the constant aroma of good food. Leo was thriving, enrolled in a great school, his laughter once again filling every room. Liam had found his calling, pouring his heart and soul into the foundation. His innate kindness and first-hand experience making him uniquely effective in his role. He was no longer just surviving, he was building a legacy of compassion. The two families became inextricably woven together. Alistair, Elira, and Lyra were no longer visitors. They were family. Most weekends were spent together, sharing meals, kicking a soccer ball in the park, filling Alistair's once silent mansion with noise and laughter. Alistair had learned to be a father again, to be present, to listen, to love. The cold, hard shell around his heart had melted away, replaced by a warmth and joy he thought he had lost forever. One crisp autumn afternoon, as they all sat in Alistair's sprawling backyard, watching the children play, Alistair turned to Liam. "You know," he said quietly, "that night, I was at my lowest point. I was a man who had everything and was about to lose the only things that mattered. I thought the world was a cold, transactional place." He looked over at his daughters, their faces bright with happiness, and then at Leo, who was chasing after them with a joyous shout. He turned his gaze back to Liam, a look of profound gratitude in his eyes. "You opened your door to two strangers in a storm, and in doing so, you saved 4 people. You saved them, and you saved me." Liam simply smiled, his heart full. He looked at the family he had, a family forged not by blood, but by a simple act of kindness, a single ripple that had grown into a tidal wave of love and redemption. In a world that often measures a person's worth by the size of their bank account, remember the story of Liam and Leo. True wealth is not found in the things we accumulate, but in the compassion we share. It is in the courage to open your door to a stranger in a storm, to offer what little you have without expecting anything in return. For a single act of kindness, a moment of selfless humanity, can be the most powerful investment you will ever make. It has the power to bridge worlds, to heal broken hearts, and to build a family where one was once lost. If this story has touched your heart, share it with others as a reminder that the greatest riches in life are the ones we give away. Like and subscribe for more stories that celebrate the enduring power of the human spirit.